The mask has finally slipped. Keir Starmer, who has long dodged tough questions with polished words and half answers, found himself cornered, this time with nowhere to run. Under the piercing scrutiny of the Liaison committee, his carefully constructed narrative crumbled in real time. Numbers he claimed were solid were torn apart, contradictions exposed, and one by one, his tax claims fell like dominoes. It wasn't just political theatre, it was a public reckoning. What happened in that room was nothing short of humiliating. This wasn't a debate, it was a demolition. Let's break it all down. Keir Starmer walked into the Liaison committee, expecting business as usual, stiff questions, polite nods, and the usual political tap dance. But what he walked into was a chamber brimming with rising frustration and sharpened intent. The issue on the table? Labour's inheritance tax proposals, especially how they affect agricultural property relief, and by extension, family-run farms across Britain. This wasn't just policy. It was livelihood, legacy, and for thousands of families, the difference between survival and collapse. For weeks, Starmer had presented Labour's position as balanced and reasonable. The official line was that changes to inheritance tax were carefully designed to raise necessary funds while protecting the average family farm. But now that line was under attack. When questioned, Starmer attempted to stick to familiar talking points. We weren't aiming at a particular group, he insisted. We tried to get the balance right. He even invoked figures, citing data from HMRC that around 500 estates would be affected, and that 73% of claims were under £1 million. But almost immediately, the facade began to crack. The committee wasn't there for platitudes, they were there for truth. One MP cut straight through the noise, pressing Starmer on whether the 500 estate figure included properties passed down, using business property relief as well as agricultural property relief. Starmer faltered. He first claimed it did, then hesitated, and finally admitted uncertainty. Well, I think that it does. I'll certainly go away, or... he stammered, only to be firmly corrected. No, I can assure you that it doesn't. It was the first domino to fall. Suddenly, the certainty Starmer had clung to unravelled. The committee saw what the country now sees. Labour's tax plan had been rushed, the figures incomplete, the policy riddled with blind spots. This wasn't just a gap in knowledge, it was a breach of trust. What made this moment even more damning was Starmer's demeanour. Faced with glaring inconsistencies, instead of admitting error or showing concern, he doubled down. He recited Treasury figures like a shield, hoping data could deflect doubt. But in doing so, he exposed something deeper, a refusal to acknowledge reality. As committee members pressed harder, Starmer began to fumble, not just over numbers, but over responsibility. And in a room filled with experienced MPs, that weakness did not go unnoticed. One member drove the knife in deeper, asking if Starmer would urge the Chancellor to meet directly with farming unions, especially after she had repeatedly refused. His answer? More evasion. He cited his own private meeting with the NFU president, stressing it wasn't done with great fanfare. That response, meant to show quiet leadership, only made things worse. If the issue was truly important, why wasn't there public accountability? Why hadn't the Chancellor engaged? Why all the secrecy? Then came the moment that turned discomfort into disgrace. A committee member recalled a past session where a witness, representing struggling farmers, broke down in tears describing the impact of Labour's tax changes. It was a chilling reminder that these policies weren't abstract. They had human consequences. Starmer's reaction? Cold, detached, robotic. Rather than expressing empathy or pledging to re-examine the policy, he stuck to his script. We've set out the policy, and I've made that clear. Clear? Yes. Compassionate? Absolutely not. This wasn't just a policy misstep, it was a failure of leadership. Starmer had been handed the chance to show strength through humility, to acknowledge error, show concern, and pledge to fix what was broken. Instead, he chose deflection, leaving many to wonder if he truly grasped the gravity of the issue at all. What unfolded in that committee room was more than political theatre. It was an unmasking. Starmer, the measured legal mind and polished politician, was revealed to be just another leader unwilling to face the consequences of flawed decisions. His reliance on shaky figures, his evasive responses, and his unwillingness to show genuine empathy turned a difficult grilling into a full-blown humiliation. And it was all caught on live TV. The Liaison Committee hearing did not just reveal minor oversights. It detonated a chain reaction that exposed the full scale of misrepresentation embedded in Labour's warners. They referenced one farmer who had testified that Labour's changes would make it impossible for him to pass on the farm to his children without selling off significant assets, essentially dismantling the family business just to cover the tax bill. Another committee member read a quote from a farming union leader who said Labour's plan was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how farms are structured. These weren't political opponents or partisan voices. These were the very people Labour claimed to be protecting. Starmer's response to these testimonies was both telling and troubling. Rather than show remorse or indicate a willingness to re-evaluate the policy, he stuck to abstract figures and process talk. He repeatedly said Labour would consult further after the election if necessary. That caveat, after the election, did not go unnoticed. Committee members seized on it, accusing Starmer of planning to win power first, then quietly rewrite the details of a policy that was already causing fear and confusion across rural Britain. It painted the picture of a leader who was more concerned with optics than outcomes, more interested in political capital than practical consequences. The pressure intensified when the focus shifted to the political fallout. One MP pointed out that Starmer had previously criticised the Tories for making hasty tax decisions without public consultation. Yet here he was, pushing forward with sweeping inheritance tax reforms based on incomplete data and vague promises. The hypocrisy was staggering. When challenged on this double standard, Starmer deflected again, claiming Labour had been transparent in its intentions. But transparency without accuracy is deception cloaked in clarity. The committee wasn't buying it, and neither was the public watching from home. Another MP raised the issue of regional inequality. He pointed out that many of the farms likely to be hit hardest were in economically fragile areas: rural Wales, Northern England, the Scottish Highlands. These communities, already facing depopulation and declining services, could ill afford another blow. Yet Labour's plan, by failing to account for the diverse structure of farm ownership across the UK, risked delivering just that. Starmer had no regional breakdown of how the policy would affect different parts of the country. He couldn't say how many multi-generational farms might be lost. He had no plan for support or exemptions. For a party that often speaks about levelling up, it was an embarrassing blind spot. As the grilling dragged on, the once composed leader began to show visible signs of strain. His voice grew tighter, his answers more clipped. The mask of calm efficiency was slipping, and what emerged beneath was a man unprepared for the depth of scrutiny real leadership demands. He attempted to steer the conversation toward broader Labour values: fairness, redistribution, social justice. But these abstract ideals fell flat in the face of the committee's relentless insistence on facts. This wasn't a campaign rally, it was an accountability tribunal. Then came one of the most damning moments of all. A member asked if Labour had conducted any economic impact assessment at all. Had they studied how many farms would need to be sold to cover the new tax burden? Had they consulted rural banks or agricultural cooperatives? Had they spoken to inheritance lawyers? Starmer's answer was a quiet but devastating no. Not because he said the word, but because of what he didn't say. No reports, no meetings, no planning. It was an admission that the policy, for all its lofty goals, was built on assumptions rather than evidence. The final blow in this section came when the committee turned to public trust. One MP said bluntly that the confusion surrounding Labour's numbers had already caused damage. Farm owners had begun restructuring estates, selling off land early, and even looking abroad for legal alternatives to inheritance. In trying to create a fairer system, Labour had created fear instead. And when trust is broken at that level, no amount of policy polish can restore it. What made this session so extraordinary was not just the exposure of bad numbers, it was the exposure of bad leadership. Keir Starmer had walked in hoping to present Labour as the party of fiscal responsibility and social justice, but he walked out with those illusions shattered. Not only had he failed to defend his policy, he had failed to defend his credibility, and with the general election drawing closer, that failure may prove fatal. The fallout from Starmer's humiliation at the Liaison committee extended far beyond the walls of the parliamentary chamber. What began as a technical challenge to a specific tax policy rapidly evolved into a political crisis that threatened to engulf the Labour leadership. His reliance on abstract economic theory and bureaucratic jargon during the committee hearing alienated many who expected empathy and practical solutions. Voters increasingly saw Labour as a party more concerned with ideological purity than with the complex, nuanced challenges of governance. This disconnect fueled cynicism and disengagement, making it harder for Labour to energise its base and appeal to undecided voters. Within Labour's own ranks, anxiety morphed into frustration. Senior figures began to question whether the leadership's approach to policy development was fit for purpose. Meetings behind closed doors reportedly featured heated debates over how the inheritance tax policy had been handled and how to respond to the backlash. Some urged a swift course correction, including a public apology and a commitment to redesign the policy with stakeholder input. Others warned against conceding too much ground, fearing it would signal weakness and embolden opponents. This internal tug-of-war highlighted a party struggling to maintain coherence amid mounting external pressure. The uncertainty extended to Labour's broader economic strategy. If the party was vulnerable on inheritance tax, a relatively narrow issue, critics argued it was even more exposed on wider questions about taxation, public spending, and economic growth. Starmer's credibility as a steward of the economy was now in serious doubt, complicating efforts to present a comprehensive vision for the future. This vulnerability gave opposition parties ammunition to challenge Labour on multiple fronts, from corporate tax policies to public services funding, creating a hostile political environment that Starmer would find difficult to navigate. Adding to Labour's woes was the timing of this crisis. With the general election looming, every day of negative headlines further eroded momentum. Polling data revealed a shift in voter sentiment, with Labour losing ground among crucial swing voters who had once been receptive to Starmer's message of competence and moderation. Political analysts warned that unless the leadership acted decisively, Labour risked not only electoral defeat, but a prolonged period of internal instability and diminished influence. The stakes had never been higher. Despite the mounting pressure, Starmer's response appeared measured but cautious. Publicly, he reaffirmed Labour's commitment to fairness and economic justice, emphasising the party's broader goals rather than addressing the specific criticisms in detail. Behind closed doors, sources indicated he was seeking advice on damage control strategies and exploring options for policy revision post-election. Yet the lack of immediate, transparent engagement left many observers wondering whether Starmer truly grasped the depth of the crisis, or if he was hoping to weather the storm through deflection and delay. Meanwhile, opposition forces began to organise more coordinated attacks. Conservative strategists targeted vulnerable Labour-held seats, with tailored messaging about the inheritance tax debacle. Campaign materials highlighted quotes from the Liaison committee hearing and leveraged local stories of families affected by uncertainty and fear. Liberal Democrats pushed for televised debates focused on economic competence, aiming to force Starmer onto the defensive. The political battlefield was set for an intense showdown where every misstep could be exploited, and the inheritance tax controversy was poised to be a central battleground. This section of the story reveals a party at a crossroads. Starmer's humiliation at the Liaison committee has sparked a crisis that goes far beyond one policy failure. It calls into question the entire Labour project under his leadership. The damage is real, tangible, and unfolding in real time, as the party grapples with how to respond to the dual pressures of internal dissent and external attack. The road ahead is fraught with peril, and how Starmer navigates this turbulence could determine not only his political future, but the fate of Labour itself. The scene is set for a political showdown like no other. Starmer's crushing defeat at the Liaison Committee has laid bare the cracks within Labour's leadership and exposed vulnerabilities that opponents will ruthlessly exploit. The question now is whether Starmer can turn this crisis into a comeback, or if this will mark the beginning of an irreversible decline. For viewers watching closely, the stakes couldn't be clearer. This moment will define not only Starmer's legacy, but the future direction of British politics itself. Every second counts as Labour scrambles to regain trust. The leadership must move beyond defensive statements and vague promises. They need clear, concrete answers that address the public's legitimate concerns about tax policy and economic fairness. Transparency and accountability are no longer optional, they are essential. If Labour fails to deliver a credible response, it risks alienating key voter groups and handing the opposition a decisive advantage. The road ahead demands bold leadership, honest communication, and a willingness to listen. For those who care about the future of the country, it's time to pay attention. This isn't just political drama, it's a battle over the direction of economic policy, social justice, and governance. Starmer's next moves will send a powerful message about whether Labour can truly govern with competence and integrity, or if it remains trapped in internal turmoil and public scepticism. The stakes are high, and the outcome will affect millions. If you want to stay informed about the latest developments, understand what this means for the upcoming election, and get clear, straightforward analysis without the political spin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. This story is evolving fast, and missing key updates could mean missing the bigger picture of how British politics is reshaping right before our eyes. Engage, share your thoughts, and join the conversation. Your voice matters in this moment of political upheaval. Stay tuned for our next deep dive, where we will unpack the election implications, explore Labour's strategic options, and reveal how this crisis could redraw the political map. The countdown has begun, and nothing is certain, except that the drama is far from over.